Afternoon and good evening. Merhaba, Khush Days to our viewers who have joined us from different parts of the world. I'm Dr. Rabia Aamir, the moderator and host of this session from the platform of İMBAT Academy Turkey, a virtual platform for academic discussions to engage academicians around the world. We have had very interesting sessions recorded on this platform, and the recordings are available on our YouTube channel. Duration. The first 45 minutes would be an engaging talk by a resource person, followed by an interactive dialogue with the moderator, that is me, and then we would welcome the written questions from the audience that I would be putting to the resource person. So without further ado, let me introduce our distinguished resource person, Dr. Carolina Acosta-Alzuru, who has done her PhD from Georgia University. At the University of Georgia. Her scholarship focuses on the links between media, culture, and society, and bridges the disciplines of cultural studies and international media studies as she examines media texts, their production, and reception. She's the author of 3 books, and she has written extensively many research papers published in journalism, mass communication monographs, many more. Dr. Acosta-Alzuru has received several research awards, in particular her studies of telenovelas, El País de las Mujeres, and Costa Rica were recognized by the Cultural and Cultural Studies Division of the Association of Education in Journalism and Mass Communication. Dr. Acosta-Alzuru is the recipient of multiple highest teaching honor. She is also the 2015 Scripps Howard Foundation Journalism and Mass Communication Teacher of the Year and National Award. Since 2016, her research has taken her to Istanbul as she examines the tensions between domestic and global markets for Turkish dramas. So, born in Caracas, Venezuela, Dr. Acosta-Alzuru taught previously at Universidad Católica Andrés Bello in to invite our distinguished resource person, Carolina, and the floor is yours, Dr. Carolina.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabia. Merhabalar, davetiniz için çok teşekkürler. Türkçem iyi değil maalesef. Sadece biraz konuşabilirim. Bu yüzden İngilizce konuşmam lazım. So I will speak in English for obvious reasons. I know some Turkish, but very little Turkish still. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen so we can talk about the traveling Turkish Dizis. So we're going to talk about the traveling Turkish Dizi. And, Dizis are series, are television series, and they have stories. And you know how stories begin. They begin with Once Upon a Time, Bir Zamanlar. And so Once Upon a Time, when we were talking about television around the world, Turkey's annual international sales of television content was only $10,000. That was it. Once upon a time, Turkish distributors wouldn't sell anything when they went to TV content markets around the world, especially those that target the Americas. They wouldn't sell anything. They would sit there, try to sell, and not sell. Once upon a time, Turkish production had only the Turkish audience in mind. At that time, Latin American telenovelas, which are serialized dramatic love stories, Latin American telenovelas, originally, of course, from Latin America, they occupied the programming grids of 130 countries. In Latin American countries, the prime time of television was really populated only by telenovelas made in Latin America. And in the United States, all the decision makers at the Spanish language networks were very sure that telenovelas would always occupy their prime time. That was then, once upon a time. Also, from an academic perspective, at that time, theories of geographic and cultural proximity explained how content traveled. So if content was always traveling to what was geographically close or culturally close by. That was then, but now this is the situation. According to the Turkish government, to their news outlet, in 2020, last year, Turkey made $500 million selling dramas. And I know that many suspect the numbers from the government. So let's go a little bit back to 2017, when the international trade publications about television announced that Turkey had made $350 million selling dramas. So this is a huge increase from just $10,000, right? International sales are now an important factor for everyone who works in the Turkish television sector. Gone are the days in which producers would tell me that they produce with the Turkish audience in mind only. Those days are gone. And Turkish dramas have taken the place of telenovelas in many, many countries around the world. Even in Latin America, the birthplace of telenovelas, Turkish dramas are present in most Latin American countries' television. In the US, where I teach and where I live, both Univision and Telemundo, which are the two main Spanish language TV channels, they have broadcast Turkish dramas, even in the important primetime slots. And when we go to the academic theories, well, it turns out that theories of cultural and geographic proximity didn't really explain to us how come, in Chile and in Argentina, they're watching Turkish dramas and loving them. So the situation has changed immensely, and we have to ask, how did this happen? How did this happen? So, I could tell this story very detailed, but I'm going just to go with the highlights. So it all starts with Gümüş. So Gümüş, by a very interesting story that is like a Dizi in and of itself, ends up being shown in the Arab countries and in the Middle East with high success. And that made those countries want to have more Turkish content. There were others, but I need to mention Aşk-ı Memnu because this is a huge success, not only there, but it started also working in places like the Balkan countries and Eastern Europe. So that's sort of the beginning of the story there. And while it was there, I, as a scholar, kept thinking, well, this can be explained by theories of cultural proximity and cultural and geographic proximity. But when Binbir Gece popped up in Chile, and immediately after, Fatma Gül'ün Suçu Ne also did the same, and Latin America started becoming an important market, then I started paying a lot of attention. Before I go into the Latin American case, which is very interesting, I would like to mention Spain, because Spain right now is a really hot market for Turkish dramas. And what spearheaded this was actually, again, Fatma Gül. The sale of Fatma Gül to Spain opened up this market for Turkish Dizis, and right now it's a very hot market. Let's look at the Americas. And as I said before, it all started with Binbir Gece broadcast in Chile, followed by Fatma Gül. And this was in 2014. And just a year later, Chile had broadcast already 8 Turkish dramas. So this was, it's like they found something that really worked on the Chilean audience. So it moved really quickly. And then Chile becomes the hub, the original hub, where Turkish dramas were being dubbed to Spanish. And then immediately it started spreading almost, and this is it's a terrible metaphor for a time in which we're living in a pandemic, but it started spreading like a virus that gets, nearby countries started to get, the virus, the engagement with these dramas. And so the demand for these dramas started spreading throughout the rest of Latin America, even in places like Brazil, even though they were not really on open television in Brazil, but there was a lot of demand from the audience on YouTube and on several channels that the audience uses to watch these things, that I will talk about them later. And then it went to Central America, Mexico, and then we get to the US, where we have 2 networks that are in Spanish language, Telemundo and Univision. These are huge networks. The United States has a huge population of Latino origin, Hispanic origin. And so suddenly we had there the Turkish dramas. In 2019, this was something many of us, including me, never thought we would see. Univision, one of those 2 big networks, one that buys almost all its content of primetime from Mexico, broadcast Cara Sevda on primetime to very good ratings. In 2020, Telemundo broadcast Genetin Gözyaşları, also on the primetime. And just this year, Telemundo placed Hercai in the 9 p.m. slot. So they broadcast the first season of Hercai, and it did quite well. Again, it didn't win because against it had a fantastic telenovela called Si Nos Dejan. But after the first season ended, Telemundo decided to put at the 9 p.m. slot a telenovela that was co-produced between Telemundo and Mexico. And it failed so bad that they have brought Hercai back in its 2nd season. It just came back this week. So it is a huge change for Turkish dramas in the Americas. And something very important that we need to start understanding about the audience is that these audiences in the Americas, they are consuming Dizis, consuming Turkish dramas, but they have previously consumed the Latin American telenovelas. So their consumption of Dizis is mediated by their knowledge or their experience with telenovelas. So we need to talk about all this. I'm saying a lot of things, Turkish dramas, Turkish series, and all that. And let's talk a little bit about that. So in English, we have Turkish dramas, and I'm sure almost everyone in the world knows what that means, is these dramas that come from Turkish. But in some media outlets, we can hear Turkish telenovelas, because the telenovela and the Turkish drama, they are like related, and we will talk about that in a second. But in Spanish, they're called telenovelas turcas, and in some countries, simply las turcas, the Turkish. But we have to say that the real name of this, the Turkish name, is Dizi. Dizi means series, and this is how they're called in Turkey. And many fans of Turkish Dizis call them Dizis now. So the word is beginning to be like a brand. So the Turkish Dizi and the Latin American telenovela, they are looking at each other. It's important to understand both genres, because these genres, they have similarities and differences. And it's also important because before the Turkish Dizis were seen all around the world, Latin American telenovelas were seen all around the world. So even though it is in Latin America that we have audiences that have grown up on telenovelas and now are watching Dizis, in other parts of the world, we see the same phenomenon. But it's also important to keep these two genres in sight, because when I interview producers and directors and even some actors in Turkey that work in Dizis, they all tell me that they did watch telenovelas as they were growing up. So these two genres are related. They're like cousins. Sometimes they are very similar. Sometimes they're very different. So sometimes they get closer together. Sometimes they get separated. But they're observing each other. Sometimes they take something from each other. So we have to keep them both in mind. So you might be asking yourselves, well, I don't know anything about telenovelas. Or maybe you're saying, I don't know anything about Dizi. So how are they similar and then different? The first similarity is the melodrama. They have a melodramatic structure and a melodramatic tone. That means that emotions are the spectacle. The second thing is that both serialized content. These are not one like a film, which is one thing. They have episodes. They own the prime time in the countries of origin and also in other countries. So in Turkey, the prime time, the evening, is Dizis in the main television channels. The same happens in Latin America with Latin American telenovelas. They have the prime time of the different countries. The presence of a love story is in both. This is changing because now we have like subgenres of telenovelas and subgenres of Dizis where maybe the love story doesn't have the same emphasis, but there's always love story. Both telenovelas and Dizis can be original stories or remake, do it again, or an adaptation of either an old telenovela or Dizi, or a film made now into Dizi, or a book. So we see these things, and now we're seeing that in Latin America, they're doing Turkish stories and adapting them and doing them in Spanish. And I think that many Dizis have a lot of elements of the Latin American telenovela stories. Both are sold globally. They're massively watched, but also massively deprecated. So they have a stigma, both telenovelas and Dizis. Everyone watches, but everybody criticizes, or maybe sometimes they watch and they say they don't watch. There is a stigma, and the stigma comes because for several reasons, but one of the reasons is they are massively watched, and everything that is massively watched or massively consumed sometimes has the stigma that maybe it's low quality. This stigma actually, touches everything in the telenovela world and in the Dizi world. It touches the actors, it touches the writers, it touches the directors, it touches us, the scholars who study this. Both are genres, they're not static. They are evolving, they're changing. That's why there's so much work for somebody like me who these are my objects of study. So I have a lot of work because they're all the time changing. Now, how are these different from telenovelas? The first thing we notice is the broadcast schedule. So the Dizi is broadcast once a week in Turkey. So, you have, for instance, tonight is Friday. So tonight we have something like Kırmızı Oda on television. And that is every Friday. Telenovelas are not once a week, they are daily. The Dizi episode is very long. It can be 2 hours or more than 2 hours without commercials. When you add the commercials, then you were talking about a broadcast that can be more than 3 hours long. The telenovela episodes are 1 hour long with commercials. So they're really 45 minutes long. So that's a difference. The Dizi has higher production quality. This is changing because, for instance, 4 or 5 years ago, the distance between an average DC and the quality of a telenovela was really big in general. That gap is closing, but still the DC is very well produced. The DC has a higher level of drama, and they reach the crescendo of drama in a very sort of intense way. How do they do that? Well, for instance, they use slow motion. They tell the story with different paces. Sometimes the story goes quick, sometimes it gets really slow to build up the dramatic crescendo. The use of music, the soundtracks that are written for the DC and the way they're used to make the drama higher is very much part of the storytelling, the Turkish storytelling. And importantly, in the DC, there has never been a guarantee that the ending will be happy. Telenovelas used to have always a happy ending. That is changing too. But when you don't have the guarantee of a happy ending, of course, the level of drama is higher. The DZ produced in Turkey, of course, it is subject to the regulations of the Turkish institute that regulates this, which is Eratuk, and it doesn't allow for any steamy love scenes or nudity. Telenovelas do have steamy love scenes and not, complete frontal nudity, but they can show some skin. These don't have political content. No, at least no overt political content. Telenovelas, there have been telenovelas that do have political content. I studied a telenovela in which the antagonist was a metaphor of President Hugo Chavez. This was a Venezuelan telenovela. But that would never happen in Turkey. There's no overt political content. However, there are some DCs, especially some of the historic DCs, some of the military story DCs that showcase a version of Turkish culture that I think has political overtones. Regarding their local markets, that is, for telenovelas, the Latin American countries, and for DCs, Turkey, of course, there are some differences. We've already talked about the daily broadcast of telenovelas. It's from Monday to Friday, just 1 hour. These markets tend to have only 2 competitors. If you take Mexico, you have 2 main broadcast channels, Televisa, TV Azteca. If you take Colombia, RCN and Caracol. If you go to Brazil, Globo and Red Record. If you come to the US, the 2 Spanish networks, Univision and Telemundo. Broadcasters, from what I've already said in this slide, you can tell that broadcasters are the main players. I'm talking about the broadcasters. Why? Because in most cases, the broadcaster not only broadcasts, the broadcaster produces, the broadcaster actually sells abroad also. Competition is defined by the time slot because they are 1 hour long. So the prime starts at 8. And so you have the 8 p.m. telenovela, the 9 p.m. telenovela, and the 10 p.m. telenovela. So, and every day of the week from Monday to Friday is the same telenovela at 8. So you have the same competition at 8, then a different one at 9, and a different one at 10. The telenovela production and business model today is such that the telenovela can be produced almost completely before any of it is broadcast. That means that if a telenovela doesn't work well with the audience, they can't do much unless they have another telenovela that they can place in that time slot, like they just did with Herjai in Telemundo. The telenovela at 9 p.m. wasn't working. They moved it to a different time slot. They demoted it because they put it at midnight, so nobody's watching. And then they brought Herjai. They brought a Turkish drama to substitute it. That's what you can do in that business model. But when we talk about DCs, we already know that the broadcast is weekly. And depending on the night, you don't have 2 competitors. You can have 5, 6, even 7 competitors because you have several channels that are strong and competing. Most of these channels do not produce. And actually, I would say that right now, I think none of them are producing, because in Turkey, there's a very vibrant layer of production companies and good production companies. And then you have a layer of important distributors that sell this abroad. So just to give you an example, if you take telenovela La Desalmada, it was produced by Televisa, broadcast in Televisa, Televisa will sell it. That's a Mexican telenovela. But if you take, a Dizi that is right now very successful in Turkey, Yargı. So Yargı is produced by Ayapım. It's broadcast in Canal D and is distributed internationally by MAD Entertainment. So the Dizi sector is way more complex. Competition is defined by the night because it's once a week and it takes the whole prime time, the Dizi episode. So every night is like a different horse race. If a Dizi is failing, they cancel it promptly. Why do they cancel it promptly? Because they usually have more products and slots, because they have this strong production company layer. Just to give you some numbers, this season already there have been 16 new Dizis. 4 of them already canceled because they failed. They brought from the summer 6 Dizis. 3 have been canceled. And then there's an 8th one that has been canceled that came from the previous season. So this is how competitive it is in Turkey. So we have an extremely competitive market, and I think that reflects on the quality of the product. Let's move to the Dizi audiences. Look at this photo. This photo is from Chile, and this is from a Fatma Gül and Kerim lookalike contest. So these are all Chilean women and Chilean men dressed up as Fatma Gül and Kerim, okay, in Chile, which is so far away from Turkey, right? So let's talk a little bit about these audiences. Around the world, these are watched mostly by women, but not only by women, okay? There are men who watch too, but I would say the majority are women. Most of this audience is 30 years old or older. It's an older audience. They come from all education and socioeconomic levels. It is not true that only uneducated women watch telenovelas or Disney. That is completely false, and don't ever trust anyone who says that to you. Many of these audiences around the world grew up watching telenovelas. Some, when I asked them, some tell me they were disenchanted from telenovelas, and that's how they got hooked by Turkish Dizis. Most of them understand very well the melodramatic codes because they grew up on telenovelas, and they embrace the Turkish storytelling style, the production quality, the acting quality, and the scenery. They love the scenery. They are also attracted to Dizis that are generally hardcore dramas around the world. If you take a general view, they like hardcore dramas. They like Dizis that have a strong central love story. And they also like Dizis that present a moral and ethical dilemma. But this is a general view. And of course, in television, nothing very general is accurate because there are regional nuances. So I'll just mention a few. So if you take a Dizi that is, what we call one of the historic Dizis, Kuruluş Osman. Kuruluş Osman is very successful. That type of Dizi, the Dizi that is historic, epic, they're very successful in the Middle East and in some of the former Soviet Union countries, Eastern Europe, and so on. But in Latin America, what works better is, generally speaking, the strong love story, very dramatic, like Hercai. When you take, Spain and Italy, they're also, and before I show that, there also you have the sort of more telenovela-like stories working. Now, lately, we have the entry of stories from Turkey that are more on the romantic comedy side. And so things like Sen Çal Kapımı or Erkenci Kuş. And those are working well, beginning to work well both in Latin America and in Spain and Italy. There are some regions like the Balkans and some of the Eastern European countries in which, both sort of the historic ones like Kuruluş or the strong telenovela ones like Hercai work. So the Dizi audience, why do they watch? The Dizi makes the international audience move in this tension between what is familiar to them and what is exotic to them. So, for instance, if they're watching a scene in which the whole family in the Dizi is having a breakfast, that's familiar to them, a breakfast of the whole family, sitting together to have a meal. But what is on that table seems maybe different, seems slightly exotic, because maybe they notice that on the table there are, for instance, olives. And maybe in their original country, you don't eat olives for breakfast or cucumber for breakfast. So moving from the familiar to what seems not familiar, exotic. That movement keeps the audience engaged. But we also have to say that what is local to Turkey is exotic to another culture, but maybe it is too exotic. Maybe it's too different. So we ask the question, how much is too much? So you can have there is an appeal of the exotic, but there can be a possible rejection of the local. So for instance, audiences around the world, they are engaged when they see, something like a Dizi that is produced in, some beautiful place like Mardin. And they feel not only that they're traveling to a different place, but also to a different time. But maybe in that story, they see a lot of sort of clan culture, and that they don't like that. That goes against too much their own culture. So we have the audience, the writers and the producers, when they want to sell abroad, they're moving here very carefully. So if we think of the two things, we need to realize that the key question then is, how different are the producing and the receiving cultures? So how different is, for instance, I'm Venezuelan, I'm born in Venezuela. How different is Venezuelan culture from Turkish culture? And so maybe that difference is what determines the possible rejection of something that seems too local in Turkey, or maybe we're closer than we think. So this is the key question when we're looking at the audiences. And that question, of course, the answer is going to change region by region. So where are they watching, the international audiences? How do they start watching Dizis? So they start when, most of them, when in their country they buy these Dizis and they put them on, traditional television. And so they watch the first, and then they want more. And when they want more, and they can't find more on TV, then they go to their devices and let me see if I can, Netflix has some of them. And then they find some of them in Netflix, and maybe they are like, oh, I heard that they have some in YouTube with subtitles that are not in Netflix. And so they find these ones that are, the subtitles are really, basically illegal, but they find them, they watch them, and then they want more. And so they find that in social media, they find that Facebook has an immense amount of closed, secret Facebook groups that follow a particular Dizi or a particular actor. And then there's Telegram. There are Telegram channels in which these audiences can access complete Dizis with subtitles. Sometimes they pay for this content. Sometimes it's free. As they make this movement that I've just described, really the viewer is being transformed into a fan. And the fandom is a whole academic area of study, and I'm not going to dwell on that right now, but I'll just say a few things. Fans have a shared awareness that they belong to a group. that they are not alone in being fan of a particular Dizi or a particular actor. Their activity goes beyond just watching. They talk, they do other things. Digital technology these days increases the possibilities of doing fandom activity because we can talk to each other, we can produce content also. So some of their activities are they often watch live the Dizi, even with a huge time difference. So I have observed Chilean, for instance, and Argentinian audiences watching a particular Dizi, and they are watching at 1 p.m. in Argentina or Chile, the Dizi that is at 8, 9 p.m. in Turkey. And they're watching without subtitles. They're watching live, even if they don't understand Turkish. They also participate in subtitles, in what we call fan subbing. So sometimes, there are these sort of, there's a whole, we call this in English a cottage industry. So like an industry under the sector that is all around the world and network, and they take a DC language, they generate subtitles in English very quickly, and then groups of fans in different parts of the world take those in English and translate those to their own language. They also contribute, they manage and administer Facebook pages, Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, promote the DC or the actor of their choice. They do fundraising in the name of their favorite actor, DC, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. They are Turkish culture consumers because as they become fans, they begin consuming this culture, and then they become Turkish culture spreaders. In that sense, we have, there is the soft power of the Turkish Dizi that takes culture to other places where it spreads thanks to the fans. So we see an increase before the pandemic, of course. We see an increase in tourism, but this is Dizi tourism. These tourists come to Turkey because they watch Dizis. So yes, they will go visit, the Topkapi Palace and Sultanahmet Cami in Hagia Sophia. They will go there, but they want also to see they go to Bebek to see the house of Elif Deniser from Karaparaşk, or the restaurant where Fatma Gül's restaurant. So they include that. They have an interest in learning Turkish, of course. This photo is from an event that I attended. And so this person here is a Turkish actor, Engin Akyürek. And Engin probably has the biggest, most active fandom in the world. And so his fans, there are many, many, many clubs of fans of Engin Akyürek around the world, but there's one that sort of unites them all, and every year they do crowdfunding, fundraising for some cause in Turkey. And this year it was for the Darüşşafaka Society in Turkey. And of all the fans that gave money, they do like a lottery, and 13 fans won the lottery to meet Mr. Akyürek. So this is that meeting. It was a Darüşşafaka Society, and you see him there. And this is his manager, Özlem Hanım. And this is the person who was interpreting Turkish English. This is the person that was translating Turkish Spanish. The rest of the women you see there are fans. They came from 13 different countries. And this is me observing. I am very appreciative for the person who took the photo from above, because here you have an anatomy of a scene. And so this is very particular event that comes out of a good thing, which is donating money for a good cause. These are some fans from Uruguay and Argentina. They're now my friends, and this day they were following the locations where the final episode of Karaparaşk was shot, And here they are with the guide, and the guide is seeing the scene from Karaparaşk in his phone, and they are looking at the scene, and they would all then look around to see if they were in the right place. This is more recent. These are fans visiting Mr. Akürek in the set of Sefir'in Kızı. And Mr. Akürek, he writes a monthly short story for the magazine Kafasına Göre. And these short stories are translated by his fan clubs all around the world in the different languages. This is a group of women from Uruguay that are learning Turkish. Their teacher is actually in Argentina, so this is remote learning. And they're here with their notebooks that have Mr. Akürek on the cover. And what it says there is learning Turkish for him. So the traveling Dizi, it travels, it engages, and it turns viewers into fans. And viewers' appetite for Dizis really increases. The more they watch, the more they want to watch. And as they move towards fandom, they do work for the Dizi sector. They become an important part of promoting and spreading the series and Turkish culture. So how is the Turkish TV sector reacting to this? So at first, I would have like a split screen in my head because I would observe this, but I wouldn't see a whole lot on the Turkish sector about that. So, they would go to the television markets. They would tell me all these anecdotes about fans, but there was nothing really done to really put together these two things. Now they're able to bring some of the actors to these television content markets. This year, this is from last week, this is Beatriz Sea from Intermedia, which is one of the distributors, and she's at the set of Aziz, a new Dizi, and this video was shown in a big trade publication, electronic publication called Pro that targets Latin American buyers. In this one, I participated. I'm the one in the middle. So this was from ATV Distribution, and they did this interview. We did this interview. I actually appreciate that they gave me control of the questions I could ask. I interviewed on YouTube Live the protagonist of Kuruluş Osman. Canal D has now an app called Canal D Drama for Latin America. And this app takes me to the digital platform issue. And this presentation is going to finish soon. Don't worry, maybe it's too long for you right now. But I need to say a word about digital platforms. And so if we take Netflix and we do a search just with Turkish, we immediately find, and there's more, was just my screen, traditional DCs that have been broadcast in Turkey are now on Netflix. Like this one is Karaparaşk, this is Diriliş Ertuğrul, and so on and so forth. They also have now, of course, Netflix is doing series for Netflix with Turkish producers. So, here we have, Atiye, and this is one of the latest Kulüp. Today, there's a new one coming out. In Turkey, we have streaming platforms that are Turkish, Blue TV, Puhu, XN, Gain. And all this creates more opportunities to create more content that isn't as regulated as the one that appears on the channels. And platforms are a big deal. Therefore, we're seeing now more and more deals that sell Turkish content to platforms abroad. So last week, Mad Entertainment announced that it made a huge deal with HBO Max Latin America with all these dramas that they represent. To finish, I want to finish with this photograph of Istanbul that I took this from Kadıköy. Those of you who are in Istanbul will recognize the angle. This is probably the best photo I've ever taken in my life of anything or anyone. But every time I look at this photo, it makes me think of my research, and it makes me think of television audiences around the world, people who watch Dizis. They watch the Dizi and they see this country that, seems far away, seems beautiful, has a skyline like no other, like the one we see here of Istanbul, and has there's something very cinematographic about it, and they want to get to know more about it. And as they learn more about it, they spread it. And this is a never-ending cycle. And I think the Turkish DC will be very healthy in the international market for a while. But I keep my eye on it. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen now. All right.
I have got so many questions. I don't know, and the audience must have many questions too. But for me, I have many questions. It's like it was such an enlightening talk about, we came to understand what are Dizi and what is the difference between telenovela and Dizi, technically speaking, and then also what are the thematic differences between the two, and what are the similarities, of course. Question. And since I am here in Pakistan, and that is why I'm just asking you this question: that why would Latin American audience go for Turkish drama? Why not Bollywood? Which Bollywood also have some many melodramatic overtones closer to the liking of a Latin American audience, or maybe Hollywood, which is basically in English language. So why are
So I had a little delay there listening to you. The internet suddenly like blinked, but I would say, Latin American audiences do love Hollywood movies. They do. These are usually subtitled in movie theaters, and when they're broadcast on television, they are dubbed to Spanish or to Portuguese if we're talking about Brazil. In that sense, Latin American audiences are used to dubbed content on their TV sets. But the thing is that when we talk about Bollywood and Hollywood, we're talking about films in general, and those are one thing, a unit. We're here talking about serialized stories that you can follow one day and the next day, or 1 week and the next week. They are written in such a way that they hook you and hold to you until the next episode. And everybody loves that. It's like reading a book that's a page turner. You finish the one episode and you finish. It's like watching Netflix, in which people go and binge watch because they can't stop. So I think the question really that I ask myself all the time is why why haven't serialized melodramatic stories from other countries like India and Greece, just to name two, haven't penetrated the Latin American market like Turkish DC have? And of course, I don't know the exact answer, but it is a mix of marketing, the way these things are distributed and sold. But I think also in the case of Latin America, the cultural difference between Turkey and Latin America, people think they're far away and they're very different. They're not that different.
No, they're not. Okay, I understand. And I think a close observation would reveal this thing, that the cultural difference between Turkey and Latin America, that is far less as compared to any other, the way when I talked about Bollywood, certainly. So that may be the reason that it. I have, I don't know, my audience may be knowing it more, but can you please elaborate why Turkish drama is called a Dizi? Because basically, Dizi is a kind of a Chinese flute, and also the fact that the competition of the broadcast of a Dizi is the night of the week. Well, that is something that you already talked about, and that's very clear. But can you just talk about this aspect that it's called a Dizi, however, in Chinese language, in here?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think that well, I didn't know that there's a flute that it's called dizi, but dizi really is a word in Turkish, and
Mm-hmm.
it means series.
Mm-hmm.
And people refer to these serials that they watch every night. They refer to them as dizis.
Okay.
And the interesting thing for me is that Turkish is not a language that is spoken widely around the world, but now the word dizi is becoming increasingly known because of these dramas. People realize they call them first Turkish soap operas or Turkish
Mm-hmm.
telenovelas, and then they end up learning, oh, they're called dizis, and they start saying dizis, which is quite interesting to me. The DC can teach a lot of Turkish language. So I've seen, you know, women from Latin America telling me, oh, did you watch the last volume? Which is really the last episode. They say volume in Turkish. And to me,
Mm.
that's like so interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Because international audience and Latin American, they are catching the words and they're using it in their daily lives. That's true. So that brings me this a question, small little question. Why do you think that there are women, more women watching DZs or telenovelas? Well, that is a phenomenon, I would say. We can. What is the reason of, like, what may be the reason?
Yeah, I think, well, this type of stories originally, the original ones, which are the Latin American ones, were developed for women, right? Just like the US soap opera was developed for women. And so they have at the core this thing about a female audience. But, and the majority are women, especially around the world. That doesn't mean that men don't watch. Also, we are seeing diseases that are being written and produced to attract a male audience. We also see it in telenovelas that are to attract male audiences. So some of the historic ones, like Diriliş Ertuğrul, Kuruluş Osman, they attract male audiences. But we also see some stories like İçeride, Çukur, currently on Mondays, Üç Kuruş. And of course, right now, as we speak, is probably on the air in Turkey, Arka Sokaklar. These are stories that attract men. The male audience has become important too, but still the majority of the DC audience are women.
Right. That they are now engaging male audience as well by showing these different sort of programs. I would encourage the audience to keep writing the questions. I'll come to your questions in a while. But there's this a small little about the subtitles. Is that the subtitles are illegal?
No, no. Of course, there are legal subtitles too, but I mean, the majority of the international audience, they know their way to find places where these will appear immediately. And I mean, so quickly. Professor Rabia, it used to be that an episode would broadcast in Turkey and the fans would wait 2 days, 3 days, 4 days to get the episode with subtitles. Now, the 4 hours later, the episode
Mm.
has subtitles in English. And so, but they are in places that aren't easy to access because they
Mm.
are illegal in a way. And some of
Mhm.
these platforms, they charge the audience, some don't. Some
Mm.
have ways of charging and making it impossible for that person to share it with another. Some don't. And so you see some fan clubs that they pay one time and they share it among themselves. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting. And of course, there is a battle against this from the sector to battle
Mm.
this, but it's like mushrooms. They appear everywhere and they try to stomp it here, appears here, stomp it there. And at the
Mm.
same time, I think the sector has learned that this is also promotion because
Yeah.
these fans are talking about it on social media, are talking about, they start saying, oh, I'm watching this right now in Turkey, you know, Sadakatsus, and it's great. And so it starts going around the word, and
Mm.
that's promotion too.
That's promotion too, and see how much cultural exchange is taking place. You know, we've this these Turkish programs, or they're not only popular uh, in Latin America, but all over the world, and especially in Pakistan, where of course they're officially promoted as well. You know, one of the programs which was dubbed in Urdu also, that is promoting all that culture, and there's a cross cultural, you know, uh, thing going on around. um, uh, well, there's a small little question, like for example, uh, do you think that let's analyze it a little bit, that
Mhm.
do you think that it is glamour, or is it storyline, is it setting, what is it? Or are they, or they like the scenery, Turkish scenery, right?
Yeah,
So is it, what factor is the most
I,
attractive?
yeah, I think there are several factors. I think there are several factors. I think there is glamour, but well, let me see if I can organize the answer. So I think there are several factors. One of the factors is that, love stories that are difficult are always appealing. I also
Mm-hmm.
think that this thing about showing the emotions, that emotions are the spectacle. Emotions are universal. We all have emotions, so we can engage with that.
Yeah.
I also think that the scenery is something that is beautiful. The ones that are set in Istanbul. Istanbul is a city that is many cities in one city, and you can see all those cities in Dizis, and some of them have this very cinematographic um, aspect to it. I've been asked by some audiences from around the world, wow, they always bring the seagulls for the
Mm.
scene. Like, they don't bring them, they're there. They're
Yeah,
there. The seagulls
that's
are
true.
part of it. They are
That's
there.
part of the
Yeah,
scene.
yeah, so there's that. But I think one of the main things is the storytelling
Yeah.
style of the Turkish. Turkey
Yes.
is a country, the culture is a culture of storytelling, of
Telling.
telling
Yes.
stories. And
Yeah.
so,
That's.
even in the Turkish language, there is a conjugation for that indicates that somebody's telling you a story when and the story is, bir varmış bir yokmuş. That's how it starts, a story. They
Yeah.
start that way. It's part of the culture. And the way they tell the stories audiovisually is really engaging because
Yeah.
they change, as I said in the presentation, they change the pace, how quickly or how slow they go. They're
Hmm.
very well directed. Um, they bring, this sense of, oh my God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? When you think that something is going to happen this way, they turn it. I have been studying dramas like this for 22 years. I shouldn't be surprised about anything, And just
Hmm.
10 days ago, I was watching Yargı live. And at the end of the episode, the guy who is the murderer suddenly turned around and blamed his father. And he said, Babam yaptı. And I was like, what? Me, who has been studying this forever. And imagine if it does that for me, imagine what it does to the audience. So
Yeah.
all those are elements that keep people going back to the DC.
Yeah, that keeps them engaged, that keeps them hooked. But it's basically, yes, you're right, I agree with you, because the storyline is like very engaging, and yes, the storytelling techniques. And I would also invite the audience that in if you visit the IMBAT Academy's YouTube channel, there is this neuroscience of story. Professor, he's from Japan, and he's talking about the neuroscience element of stories, and how the stories engage the audience and keep them hooked, and that is a beautiful way to teach. Another question I have in mind, and that's like, why do you think that the co-production failed? Like, and I asked this because and Turkey also. So, but you were telling about in your presentation that the co-production between Latin America and Turkish, and, yeah, this industry, it failed. So, what were the reasons? What do you
No,
think?
I'm not saying that what it failed. What failed was a particular telenovela on a slot, and then
Okay.
they put I think co-production is a very interesting thing, and we're beginning to see what shape co-production will take. So, for instance, we have now produced in Mexico the sort of Mexican version of Shasiyet, which is what was produced originally, I think, for a platform in Turkey. They took that and they made a Mexican version, but that Mexican version is very approved by the Turkish original producer Ayapım. So they're beginning to work together. There is an acknowledgement that the Latin Americans also tell stories. There's an acknowledgement that the Latin American audience is a hot audience. So, for instance, last season, ATV had a DC called Maria and Mustafa. And Maria
Mhm.
was originally from Colombia. And Maria
Yeah.
was talking about Colombian coffee, and Mustafa, and this was placed in Cappadocia. So this
Okay.
is clearly, a product that would be appealing to the Latin American audience, but also to the Turkish audience.
Audience,
So
yes.
in this presentation, I didn't talk a whole lot about one of the areas that really, really keeps me studying, which is the tension that exists between the Turkish audience and the international audience success.
Mm,
So, what is more important, ratings or international sales or dollars? What's more
mm,
important?
mm,
Because some stories, they work very well in the international market and they didn't work well in Turkey, and the other way around. And also some stories sell in a particular area. You're in Pakistan. Pakistan is a country that is a good consumer of things like Didilish, Ertuğrul, Kuruluş Osman. There are some new ones that are coming.
Mevra, Mevra,
Yeah,
and there are many others which are
exactly.
coming,
And right
and
now, yeah, there's a new one that is about to start called Destan, and
mhm,
Destan is already selling, even though not a single episode has been out. but it sells in areas of the world like Pakistan, which is interesting. Kuruluş Osman sells very well there, but not in Latin America. In Latin America, there are other things that the same distributor sells very well, like one that is called Kalp Yarası. Well, Kalp
Mm-hmm.
Yarası doesn't do half as well in Turkey as Kuruluş Osman, but it
Yeah,
sells really well over there. So that
yeah.
is interesting too.
That's a very interesting phenomena that you've pointed out, because for example, Tokral, that was like the audience also, but in the if there are lesser questions, my questions are still not exhausted. So I can see a question on the screen, and I'd like to put it to you that
Mhm.
the how far the dubbed versions of Turkish disease, and he happens to be one of my students, and who's asked this question. um, he's asking analysis. Does this linguistic mediation impact their decoding? Uh,
Yes, I think it depends a lot on the platform where they find these dub versions. If we're talking about the illegal ones, the legal ones, like the ones you have in Netflix, are completely legal, of course.
of
Okay,
course.
of
Mm,
course. But the illegal ones, they vary immensely in quality because some of them are really done with the software. So you know the software, as you know, the Turkish language is doesn't have gender. So if somebody says, o geldi, it can be
mm,
he came or she came, and sometimes you see
yeah.
that they say he came and it's a she. So, and that's, I'm just giving you a very small example,
Yeah, that's true.
but
Yes, that's a very acute observation, and I've been observing this also.
yes,
Uh,
and there are other things, like there are many Turkish names that mean something. So,
mhm.
if somebody is called Bahar, then suddenly you see spring went home last night, and it's not that spring; it's that her name is Bahar. So,
Yes.
so to do linguistic, discursive and semiotic analysis, I would say that those are a little bit dangerous, I would
Yeah,
say.
they are the pitfalls. And instead of doing a semiotic analysis, it's better if you do a thematic analysis, right?
Right. And
Yeah.
thematic analysis is
Thematic
fine. Yes.
analysis would be more productive, and then you can just look into the nuances. He was this was his question, and I have a question from E. Turkman also. The question says, why do some countries prefer to consume such stories so much? So, would you like to throw some light on this?
Yeah. So, uh, I think I have a very dear friend who's a very talented telenovela writer, and he
Mm-hmm.
always says that we all need our daily dose of fiction. Okay, but it is true that also love is actually the engine that moves the world in a sense. It's something that is, universal. And no matter our personal or our country's context,
Mm-hmm.
maybe these stories give us entertainment, but also
Yeah.
hope. But also hope. See how these stories, like Dizi's and Telenovelas, they sell very well and they resonate very well in countries that are used to sudden turns, upheavals, political, economic, culturally. They work there.
Hmm.
So all these, I think it's part of that answer. that we are all trying to find. I would
Yeah,
say to the person who asked this, really, what a great question. We're all trying to find the answer.
yeah, that's true. That's true. And there's always a universal appeal, which is something which is actually looking at are the themes, are the universal, you know, ideas of love and life and this, right? And like it's the basic human question.
Exactly.
And it's interesting to see that if you're thinking in one way, a person or a drama produced very remotely is also giving the same idea, you know. So you
Correct.
you have that you're all, they also have that universal appeal, and because of that appeal they are always there. So let me see if there is any other question flashing on the um, no, not yet, but if there aren't any, I would like you to just throw some light on your comment, um, with that Turkish production and I can understand that there is production and then there's distribution and then there's marketing and everything. So apart from these, what else would you like to talk about?
So I think the Turkish DC sector, the Turkish television sector, is really complex and big, and so you have the broadcast channels, then you have the production companies, then you have the distributors who sell, but also you have the actors, and the actors have managers, they have their agents, and the agents are important too in this, very important. And
Mhm,
then you have all the directors, the writers. There's
mhm,
nothing without a story. The story
mhm,
is the cornerstone. So the writers are very important, and sometimes the writers are given a story, from another country to adapt, like we
mhm,
have seen with things like right now there's one that is a BBC series called The Split. It's called in Turkish Evlilik Hakkında Her Şey. It's a version of it. Or write an original story. The writers, they have a huge responsibility. So all of this, and the writers also have managers. So all of
mhm.
this makes a very complex sector that also works, because of the high production values. They basically do everything on location, which makes production like movie production. The fact that each episode is more than 2 hours long means that
Mhm,
every week they're producing a film, every
mhm.
week.
Yeah,
And so
that's true. That's true.
that is very complex in a country that has 4 seasons, in which the light changes all the time. I've been in
Mm,
sets just observing, and I am always in wonder how they how they pull it off, the effort
yeah, they
in a
how do they
day, which
manage
may.
it? Like all this? Yeah, that's true.
Right. And it's not the production model of telenovelas, in which everything is done ahead of time before they broadcast. No, they are basically doing what is going to be shown next week. And
Next week,
so,
yes, it's kind of a
yeah, so
live. It's kind of a
right.
live. Yes.
Right. And so the Turkish audience still has a voice in the story, because the writers
Mm,
and the producers are seeing how the story is being received. And sometimes they make little tweaks and changes. Sometimes the story isn't failing and they start making things and make it worse. Sometimes they save it, but sometimes they make it worse. So it's a very, very interesting object of study. Very complex, but
Very,
very
very
interesting.
complex. Yes, right. When you were talking about this program and this drama, Harjai, it's basically an Urdu word, and I'm sure that my Urdu listeners over here, they would relate with this, because we know what is Harjai is, and the title itself. Turkish drama or Turkish, film industry on this whole setup. Do you think that it is well, this is a somewhat political question, that
Mhm.
it has put some dent in other markets of Hollywood or Bollywood industry? Do you think that there is some, or they are thriving like that? Nothing is amiss
I
there.
think I think they probably have. I don't have a way to measure that right now, but I think they probably have, because when you think of television in traditional television, they must have, because in traditional television you have so many slots where to put
Yes.
programs, and if the Turkish program is here, nothing else can fit in there. So I think it definitely has for the telenovela world, because 10 years ago, I would look at the prime time of a country like Serbia, and it was telenovela, telenovela, telenovela. But now it's Turkish drama, Turkish drama, Turkish drama. So they do make a dent.
Hmm.
I think uh, there is soft power in this, of course,
Of
because
course, there
it's
is.
a country that was not on the grid of many other countries is now, because they can see it. They can
Hmm.
see it and they can say, I want to go there, or I want to learn more, or I want to see more. So
Hmm.
that is, and of course, there are some, I mentioned in the presentation very quickly, but when I said, there is no political content, but I think there are political overtones. I think there are in some of these stories. There's a specific version of Turkish history,
Yeah,
character, and
that's true.
culture. You can
Yes.
see that in the historic ones like Dirilish, Kuruluş, and things like Uyanış, Büyük Selçuklu. But
Hmm.
also they were doing some military stories. Right now we
Hmm.
don't have any, but Söz, Savaşçı, also they have that. But those stories, even though the historic ones sell well in some places like Pakistan and the Middle East and so forth, they were not
Hmm.
the big sellers everywhere. But right now there's a
Hmm.
story, a DC called Teşkilat, and
Yeah.
Teşkilat is in it's in the package is different. It's
Hmm.
about counterterrorism and things like that. Very interesting, very well done. But if you really look at the discursive version of Turkey there, it is very similar to those others. And
Yeah,
most
that's
of these are broadcast in TRT1. So
yeah.
that is also important, and it's an important factor. And that's sort of the political overtone.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have right now in Turkey a type of subgenre, which is
Hmm.
the DC that talks about sort of psychological and
Yes.
psychiatric cases. They come from the books of a particular therapist. And we have right now three on the air:
Mm.
Camdaki Kız, Kırmızı Oda, and on Tuesdays, Masumlar Apartmanı. And
Okay.
these ones, it's going to be interesting to see whether they sell abroad, and if they sell, whether they work, because they're very well done and very interesting. but they can be dark at times, the story.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But they say, as we say it in literature, whether it is like, even if it is a love story, it has some, so and that, especially that program, if you have come across that Pai Takht, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. In Urdu, we pronounce it as Pai Takht. But
Oh,
that
see,
program,
Abdul
yeah,
Hamid.
Abdul Hamid, yes.
Yeah,
So Pai Takht Abdul Hamid. So that is something. It is full of politics, and
yeah,
it is a political plot, and the storyline. It is shrewdly constructed, and any audience who would love to go into that detail might be in for that. Um, anyway, let us see. Okay. Um, there's basically some thanks coming out.
no,
And
thank you all.
yeah, yeah. But I have a very interesting part in your presentation when you were talking about familiar and exotic. That
Yeah,
there's things in familiar when we can relate with, but there are also some things on the same table which are exotic, and that is something that we are intrigued to know more about. Yes. So,
correct.
and I'm sure that and you can see that like there are other uh, exotic aspect. Is it paves the way, doesn't it?
Yes, and it's interesting, the whole familiar and exotic. There are many, many examples. I gave the example of the breakfast because that's one of the ones that always pops in my mind. But
Hmm.
for example, just to give you an example, so we all have weddings in all our cultures, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we know what a wedding is. Yes, but then we go and we watch a Dizi, and generally they have the civil wedding, and it's very different. For instance, I am from Venezuela, so I'm from Latin America. Latin America is a region that is most very Catholic, let's say. And so the wedding that you depict in the story is a religious wedding in a church, and the bride goes in with her father.
yeah,
The groom doesn't see her dressed in the wedding gown before. So these audiences that are used to that suddenly start watching a DC. Oh, the wedding is coming, it's important, means the same thing. Oh, but here the bride and the groom arrive together to a judge that also says something different than what we say in the ritual. And so that's the exotic in a sense. And
yeah,
people pay attention. Also, another example is that in Turkish culture, you ask for the blessing of your elders, of the people you respect, by kissing their hand and then putting it in your forehead.
yeah,
Well, in many Latin American countries, we also ask for the blessing of our elders, but we don't do it that way. We
yeah,
literally ask for it. We say, bendición. We ask for it, and that person will say, Dios te bendiga, God bless you. So it's not the same, but it is the same. And so it
yeah,
is
yeah. The
exactly in the
concept.
same, yeah, exactly in the same situation. So
Yeah,
we, as an audience, you move from, you recognize that, but then you have to decode what's different, and that keeps you engaged. And again, this all depends on how distant or close are the two cultures we're talking about, the one that
yeah,
produces Turkey and the one that is receiving. i
yeah,
always I always thought, and now I know I was mistaken, but I always said for years, I would tell my American students, you need to learn a second language,
Yeah,
because
that's
when you learn a language, it opens other cultures. And that is true. But
yeah,
I always thought that to understand the culture, you really needed the language. And when I lived in Turkey the first time for 2 months, because I was teaching over there, I didn't speak a word of Turkish, not a word. But
mm,
every day I would walk from my where I was staying to Boğaziçi University where I was teaching. I would walk,
uh-huh,
and everything I saw, I didn't understand a word, but I knew exactly what was happening everywhere because it was so similar to the place where I grew up in Latin
yeah,
America. The scene at the butcher was exactly the same scene,
yeah,
everything. So that also is what makes the DC so strong in Latin America, that people
yeah,
recognize these things.
yeah. They can relate with so many of the things. And I similarly in Pakistan, I think there are things that the people can relate with, and that keeps them hooked, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So um, um, okay. One more small thing that I would like
Hmm.
to talk about. Um, the program of this which came earlier in October this year, which was like a neuroscience of stories, and that
Hmm.
was a very interesting take on this. That what you're talking about, you just talking about that. Yes, there are so many things common in that program also, and in that a talk and discussion that it was talking about the stories are like to listen to the stories, and we would like to endorse them also in such a way in our minds, and replay them in our minds in order to understand one aspect of life or the other. Isn't it like that? What do
It
you say?
is like that. It is like that, and that's why I was fascinated by that presentation too, because it is true. It That presentation is useful for my research, but also
Yeah,
for my teaching, because it is true that when I tell my students a story, they understand the concept better. Whatever I'm
mm,
trying to explain, when I tell a story, they understand that better. And this is not only for my undergraduate student. This even goes for my doctoral students.
yeah,
When I'm
doctoral student.
explaining, when I'm explaining something complex like a theory,
Mm,
and I use a story to
mm.
illustrate that, they get it, and and not only do they get it, it's like the class is more pleasurable.
Yeah,
And so I do think storytelling is is a wonderful thing to keep in mind and to learn.
yeah, we do that. We have to do it all the time in uh, our classes, and that's a very engaging aspect of our teaching, and which keeps us keep going in that. Dr. Carolina, it was a so wonderful talk, and we had a beautiful time together, although it's quite late over here in Pakistan. And I had a very severe attack of flu, but hope that I think that I have pulled through this with dignity, I would say. So thank you so much. It was such a lovely talk, and it was such a enlightening aspect of for students also who are listening, that it is such an interesting topic and interesting aspect of going into that this uh, studying drama and then analyzing and then a comparative drama and different cultures. This we get to. And what you just said actually reminded me of Matthew Arnold's, like, he
Mhm.
also in one of his essays, he says that you need to learn a culture and a language very different from your own.
Mhm.
That way you we are here, basically what we are here for, this life on earth, and it makes us connected. So that's a lovely thought. And thank you so much for once again for gracing our platform. And I am really grateful to IMBAT Academy, also Dr. Sybil, who gave me this opportunity to moderate this session. And it was lovely.
Uh, thank you very much, and thank you to IMDAT Academy and Dr. Sibel Bayram. I'm very, very grateful to be here, and to all of you who watched and who asked questions. Thank you very, very much. Really, this has been a pleasure, and we're all in the same journey, trying to understand stories, because in
Yeah,
the end, this is all about the human condition, and that's what we're
exactly.
trying to understand.
Right, that's so true. Folks, thank you so much for your presence, and we are signing off. And